This month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by Allison Cook, Lindsay Trebet, and Super Inframan. If you'd like to help support the show, you can do so at wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight is going to be a special UFO History Retro Edition with Mike Clelland.
Hello.
Hello.
Glad to be here.
And Aaron Gulyas.
Hi, how you doing?
And so when we first started this, the first UFO History show we did, we were going to do all of UFO history in one show. It was the first time you two were on together because I thought you'd make a good match, and I'm pretty sure I was right.
Yep.
And yeah, we got up to about 1940-ish on the first episode. And then we decided we'll do one more and we'll finish it. And we kind of skimmed from 1940 to 1980. And then, of course, we realized we might as well just break this down and take our time with it. But a number of people had suggested, and I had actually thought of it as well, that we should go back to those earlier parts that we kind of skimmed over and talk a little more about that stuff. And I went through and listened to the first two episodes and made a list of stuff we did talk about so we could talk about some different stuff.
Yeah.
And we can kind of jump around a little bit, but it'll be generally the time period between 1940 and 1980. And both of you immediately said, ooh, In Search Of.
Oh, good.
Yes.
So we can start there, and we can jump a little around after that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Leonard Nimoy's big collars. Yeah.
His wardrobe was outstanding in that.
I agree.
When did it originally air? I'm trying to think of when it originally aired.
I think if we just visualize the wardrobe, that puts it right at about 1976.
77.
77.
It started in 77.
April 17th.
But they recorded the stuff because his lapels were definitely from 1976.
Some of them, there was like a special that was earlier, I think. And then, he did. Okay. So there was In Search of Ancient Astronauts in 73.
Okay.
And so there were, those early ones were Rod Serling. And then Nimoy was brought in for the weekly show. The weekly show began in 77. Because I was 77 to 82 was the original run. Thank you, Google. And the reason I was sort of wondering about that is because I remember watching it as a little kid, and I remember the music more than anything, and that sort of the film look. I remember the look of it.
Oh, more 16 millimeter film.
Yeah,
yes.
Awesome. And I was like, boy, I must have been watching reruns because that was really old. And I looked at those dates, and I realized, no, I'm really old. I was probably watching it when it was originally, because I was born in 75, and by 82 I was like 6 or 7. That's about the same age. I sort of remember watching some of this, but it ran in syndicated reruns forever. Yeah. And in 77 I was 15, and I was primed to be like the perfect viewer for that show. You were the target demo.
I was that. Yeah, they were. In fact, I think he looks right at the camera and says Mike a few times.
What I liked about In Search Of was it was just the whole gamut of weirdness. And I have the first season on DVD, or I used to. I just rearranged all my DVDs, and I don't remember seeing it. I must have gotten rid of it.
Oh, you did not.
I bought it at a Canadian Walmart. Oh shoot! I think I got rid of it. Oh man. Okay. Anyway, it ran the whole gamut.
It's the YouTube has them all. So you're.
Yeah. Oh, that's so millennial though. So it ran the gamut. It had UFO stuff. It had ghost stuff. It had cryptozoological stuff. I think I remember the Loch Ness Monster episode being particularly wild. And then it had just, I think, weird stuff too. It's like
time travelers that walked through, like walked from one village to another in England and happened to walk through some, ancient village that,
So it really is this, it's a very 70s show, not just for Nimoy's wardrobe, but it's in this sort of 70s mode of sort of returning to the Fortean a little bit. It's the era of maybe these things are connected. You've got a lot of John Keel stuff coming out in the 1970s. So, it's of that time and that particular strand. And I'm not going to give it credit for me being interested in a wide variety of paranormal things because, that would just be too convenient. But it's just so much fun, and it holds up. I mean, if you go back and you look at some episodes, it holds up. It's not just sort of, I remember being 8 and thinking this was cool and scary. It was decent television.
There's an amazing episode, and I cannot remember the fellow's name off the top of my head, but it would have been in the early 1970s. And it was a hunter in Wyoming that was abducted, and they interviewed him. They recreated the scenes, which they did a surprisingly pretty good job, because this is in perfect 1970s. You can't do this with video because it hurts the camera, but in film you can shoot straight into the sun. So they had all kinds of things where they would kind of have the recreation, and then the camera would just go up into the sun and had all the lens flare and stuff like that. And in the 16 millimeters, it was like there was no computer generated special effects to get that effect. Right. And then Leo Sprinkle was in the episode, and they had a hypnosis session with Leo Sprinkle and interviewed Leo Sprinkle. And they also had, this was the fellow who, if I remember this correctly, there was a flying saucer, and he shot it 3 times. He fired the gun at it 3 times. The first time it went ping off the metal structure of the flying saucer. The second time, it seemed as if the bullet went right through the flying saucer, and the third time, the bullet came out of the gun in slow motion and just kind of plopped on the ground in front of him.
Weird.
And but I cannot remember the name of the fellow's name, the actual person who had the contact experience. But it was done absolutely straight.
It seems like during the 1970s, it was more acceptable to kind of throw all this stuff together. Before it started to it almost seems like it gets separated out as time goes on, where you could do an in search of with all these different subjects mixed and people were fine with it. Whereas if you did it in the 1990s, people were like, just do UFOs or just do, this, or these are all separate things. Just, separate them out into their own categories.
Yeah, everything sort of gets sort of segregated.
Yeah,
and that's not the word I'm thinking of, but filtered. Everything gets filtered through various lenses as we go on. It's the paranormal lens, it's the UFO lens, it's the conspiracy lens.
Yeah,
and then there's a little overlap, especially conspiracy and UFO stuff, of course. But yeah, there was this sort of period where things were a lot more overlapping, and there's exceptions to that. I think like the NICAP crew in the 50s were really solidly nuts and bolts, spacecraft people, but the UFO field in general was a lot more broad than that.
So there's something we didn't talk about that we probably should bring into all this because it's kind of important, but it goes back to the beginning of the 1900s, and that's Charles Fort.
Yeah, that maybe an important thing.
Yeah. He did kind of bring a lot of this stuff to light back then, and I don't think anyone else really was talking about this stuff.
No, you had sort of the late 19th, early 20th century spiritualists,
right,
sort of doing a lot of a lot of things with automatic writing and seances, and a lot of that would blur into UFO stuff, especially in the 40s and 50s. But Fort was sort of, as far as I know, and I've got an actual biography of Fort that I've been meaning to read for like 10 years, but Fort was just sort of, if you read his books really remind me of some of the paranormal and UFO books that would come out in the 70s that were, a lot of stories, a lot of different stories, with a lot of weird stuff going on, and not a lot of theorizing, not a lot of,
explaining,
explaining,
yeah.
But just like, this happened and it was weird. Here's another thing. Here's another
Yep.
thing. And as you read it, what ends up happening is when people read this stuff, then you've got this next generation of people who are drawing conclusions from these things and sort of drawing things in parallels to things that are happening in their own time. And then you have, the sort of synthesis of all that. But as far as a cataloger of the strange, a chronicler of the chronicler sounds more impressive than cataloger. Chronicler of the strange. Fort was I want to say the first one who had work that was sort of dedicated to that weirdness.
Yeah, and he just
feel free to show up in the comments and tell me I'm wrong, but I think that he probably is.
And what he did is just go to the library and look up old news articles.
Obsessively.
Yeah.
I think he lived at the library for decades, the New York Public Library. Yeah.
And he had absolutely no problem with poking fun at the scientific establishment when they, explain things completely wrong. Like saying meteors don't fall from the sky. It's just lightning striking rocks on the ground. And he's like, right, yeah, that turned out not to be the case, huh?
Yeah, and he's sort of, in doing so, demonstrates that, that sort of ironically that, yes, scientists were not correct about this, or I guess we should say natural philosophers, probably the more proper term for the time.
Yeah.
Natural philosophers weren't right about meteors, but later, with new data, they revise their approach, and now scientists did believe that. And so he sort of pokes fun, and in doing so, sort of says maybe what the scientists today say isn't the case, because look what we used to think. So it can sort of cut both ways. But yeah, he did just sort of catalog, look these things up sort of obsessively, and it would have to be just the range of stuff in an era. And not to sound too old man here, but in an era where you couldn't just type something into a machine and have it spit out a bunch of results.
Yeah.
You're sort of laboriously poring over huge amounts of text. So it's you'd have to have some kind of obsessive sort of approach to do what he did.
And I think because he wasn't looking for any one thing, you could see similarities between some of this stuff that you wouldn't otherwise see, because it was just a hodgepodge. It's just like, this is all the weird stuff I found that doesn't make sense.
Right. It's not. He wasn't coming at it with. This sounds pejorative, but he wasn't coming at it with an agenda.
Yeah.
Like some people do, and or not an agenda, but an interest. He had an interest in the weird. He didn't have an interest in weird sky stuff or weird ground stuff or weird water stuff. It was just weird stuff. So we do get this cornucopia of oddness.
And wasn't he the one that said he felt like we could be somebody's property?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
We're property. Yeah. That's. I think I first read of probably Mothman Prophecies was like the first place where I read Keel quoting Fort saying, "I think we're property," and I remember reading that, and I was in an Arby's. I was.
So you're the one.
I was the guy in an Arby's. It was like 1999. I was done with my day job, and I was waiting to go to my night job, and I was at Arby's and I read that, and a chill went through me. Yeah, it was. That's. I think we're property. It's just such a simple statement, but especially when he was writing the early 20th century, this is property is sort of a Americans aren't property. Americans own property, right?
Yeah.
So it's a disturbing thing, sort of existentially, in a sort of capitalist society, to be, to realize that you might not be the owner, you might be the property. So I was sort of, because he was sort of, Gilded Age, sort of that era a little bit, sort of the tail end of that and into the progressive era. So, we're in this sort of, extravagantly, growth focused time in American history, and taking that idea of property and sort of turning it on its head. I always liked that sort of aspect of it.
And that could have been just a early 20th century synonym for like the modern, where people are saying that we are living in a computer simulation, right? So that would have been, in essence, kind of trying to say the same thing.
Yeah.
Like, we don't have a full grasp of our reality, and we're property. And presently, we're surrounded by computers and video games and stuff like that. And we're all still struggling. We don't have a full grasp of our reality. We may be in a computer simulation. So, it could be seen as a synonym like that. And there's a wonderful book which I read going back now about 6 or 7 years ago, maybe a little more. It's called Authors of the Impossible by Jeffrey Kripal.
Yeah.
And one of the chapters, I think there's 4 big chapters, and one of them is on Charles Fort. Here, is it Fortean or Fortean?
I think it's Fortean.
I would think Fortean, but I don't think it matters.
Well, because I've heard people say Fortean a lot. It sounds great. And there's an interview with John Keel on YouTube, and he says, I'm a Fortean. And so that, if anyone is going to know, it's John Keel.
But it's sort of a made-up word. I guess all words are made up initially, but it's sort of a made-up word in the sense that you're not going to be able to look it up in the dictionary and get a pronunciation. I don't think there's an official one.
Yeah. So I guess what's the Fortean Times or Fortean Times? Yeah. Which is out of England. I'm not sure where that's.
Yeah, it's English. Yeah.
But Fort was American.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, he lived in New York City. Yeah. Okay.
Were you going somewhere with that?
No. I just was wondering because I always wondered, like, why is that in England? I guess they just like the guy. So.
Oh, I meant in the beginning. It sounded like you were going somewhere and then got taken off.
Oh, that's my modus operandi.
Okay.
I do that all the time.
All right.
So
Okay.
I'm good at that.
That's fine.
It's a conversation. Just steer me back to the center of the conversation if I start straying.
And the Fortean sort of label is slowly starting to pop up more and more in the last few years. Like for a while, if you said that, people just looked at you like, what did you say?
And Micah Hanks just like wears it as a badge of honor. He says, I am a Fortean.
Yeah.
Fortiana. He loves saying that word.
Fortiana,
yeah. Which is a great word.
And it's the thing is you have to know who Charles Fort is to know what the word means. It's not an obvious word.
Right.
But every clique has like their own inside baseball lingo.
Oh, sure. Yeah, definitely. I'm just saying to the mainstream world, that word means absolutely nothing. Like you could say, oh yeah, I do a paranormal podcast. If you said, I do a podcast on Fortiana, they'd be like, what?
Yeah. It's my sort of test is like, could I explain this to my dad or my in-laws in less than 30 seconds? It's like, okay, I need to revise the description of whatever I'm working on. So but Fortiana, it's sort of a way to and it is lingo, it is jargon. It doesn't have much, if any, meaning to the not we, but it's one of those things where you can sort of, I don't know if it's still this way, but it used to be if you sort of dropped that word, you could sort of tell by the other person's reaction if you were on the same wavelength as they were. Yeah. It's like, so what do you think about like Fortean stuff? And like, oh yeah, oh God, yeah. It's like, okay, you're my kind of person. It's sort of a in group, out group sort of tool.
Unless they think you said Freudian.
Yeah, well, that's a completely different series of conversations that always end poorly. So,
wasn't there a comic book called Fort, which featured Charles Fort as this sort of Indiana Jones type character.
I don't know.
Not Indiana Jones as far as like, but more just the mystery of that kind of thing, like digging into ancient tombs and such like that.
I don't know.
There is so here I'll say it. I've never read it, but there is a comic book out there.
Fort
called
Prophet
Fort.
of the Unexplained is a Dark Horse Comics comic book limited series. Yep, that is a thing.
Would be perfect for that.
I
think
that.
that's better than Project Blue Book. If you're going to like take someone and really tweak their legacy, it's better to tweak Charles Fort's legacy. It's a lot the present day television show Blue Book is a little tough to take. The poor. I
don't know. I kind of like it.
Okay, so I it's funny because I've seen them all and sort of grudgingly, and then I'm kind of waiting to see the next one, and then I just sit there and grumble the whole time.
What I do like about Project Blue Book, I mean, I enjoy it just for what it is, but I like the fact that at the end of every episode they tell you what they based it on, so you can actually go look and see what really happened.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important aspect to it. They make no bones that this is fiction. But hey, this is the thing that we inspired this fiction from. So, Fort, featuring the fictional adventures of famed anomalist Charles Fort, is a 4-issue miniseries written by Peter M. Lenkov with art by Fraser Iving. The series was released monthly between June and September 2002 by Dark Horse Comics.
There you have it. Yeah.
Probably cost a fortune. If you try to,
I need that. I really need that.
I was wrong. I pulled it up on eBay for $3.99 used.
Nice.
So
nice.
Mint condition, $20.
Sold.
And there's 4 episodes, and they're all available pretty affordably.
Well, I think I know what I'm buying tomorrow on payday.
Look what you did, Mike.
Yeah.
Mike.
Yeah, they can fill the empty slot where Ancient Aliens used to be. Or excuse me, where
In Search Of
used to be. Yeah, on your bookshelf. Yeah,
I think haven't they put In Search of out on Blu-ray at this point?
You would think so. I mean, it's a seminal piece of Western culture. You'd think there would be some sort of archival sort of version.
Let's see.
That show, to see that, like, that show was never on the main networks. It was always replayed on the sort of crummy stations. So that always has this kind of just like, it's already 16 millimeter to begin with. So it just had this kind of bleary aspect to it.
Yeah. It was always sort of like that washed out film look. And it was always sort of in the dead zone on Sunday afternoons on my local independent, not yet Fox. It would be the station that would end up being the Fox station, but and you never knew what it was on. It would come on if the Cubs game ended early.
Right, exactly.
So that's when they'd show it.
So it is only on DVD. However, it comes in a box set with all 144 episodes.
Wow.
Lord of mercy. Okay, yeah, I'm getting that.
And that one I just pulled up on eBay was only $25.
Nice.
So very affordable if people haven't seen it. But again, like Mike said, it's also available on YouTube.
Not all of it. Probably not every episode.
No.
But
really? It's kind of surprising. But
I don't know. I'm guessing. I mean, 100 and some odd episodes. That's a lot.
Okay, so
that seems like a freakishly huge amount of episodes. I can remember like 5. I remember actually watching.
Yeah, they have the seasons. They did more episodes in the ancient times like that.
Oh yeah, old 28, 30 episodes a season.
Yeah, well look at Star Trek. I mean, I think the first season of Star Trek had like 36 episodes or something.
Yeah, something like it was insane. Because there were 79 total. So
let's see. So if there is a new version of In Search of too with
the fellow who played Spock.
Zachary Quinn.
Right. Which is a
Quinto.
Interesting, it's a neat parallel. I've seen a couple episodes. He does a fine job. It's just like we need a guy who's played Spock to narrate this. It just seems like
exactly
everybody who could have narrated it and then there was a version earlier that had Skinner from the X-Files
Really?
as the narrator. Yeah.
Huh. Oh.
It was in 2002, ran for 8 episodes. So, yeah.
So each season of In Search of has 24 episodes.
Nice.
So it's a pretty standard order for that time up until fairly recently. I mean, 6 seasons and 24 a season.
Yep.
But that was the standard. Now the standard tends to be 10 to 12, depending.
10 to 12. Yeah. Which is very British, you know.
Yeah. Well, that's where they got it from. They realized, well, people aren't not watching these because we're giving them less episodes. I just feel like if you're going to do 10 episodes, you should have it on twice a year. You know, like 10 in the beginning, 10 near the end, so it's spaced out better.
Yep.
I would almost, a lot of fiction podcasts will do every other week. And I'm almost like, if you aired TV shows every other week, you would have new episodes almost all year.
Yeah.
And they'd be a little higher quality probably because,
Yep. You have more budget on, or more time at least. Yeah. Have 2 series that are similar in theme. So you'd have the same audience, alternate them every week. Right. Yeah. Oh, I'd be all over that.
Well, that was the NBC Mystery of the Week. They would alternate Columbo with the Rockford Files, and not the Rockford Files, Macmillan and Wife and stuff like this. I'm going back to sort of ancient history. Well, we were talking about the 70s. That doesn't have anything to do with UFOs, though. But it was an alternating show like that.
Let's talk about Maury Island, because I'm actually not. I know the Maury Island story, but it's been so long that I don't remember a lot of the details of this.
It's I actually did an episode on it last year, I think, and I put it off for so long because it's just so complex. And I think the reason I had this sort of image of the complex, sort of this impression of its complexity. So I think the first book I read about it was Ken Thomas's book, where he sort of connects it to the JFK stuff through Chrisman, and anything JFK just messes with my head because I'm like the guy with the bulletin board with the string connecting the index cards. I just I can't keep track of all of these names. But then when I went to look at it, and when I sort of did what I usually do in the show and go back to accounts of people at the time and the FBI files, it became okay. I can sort of beat this with a hammer into a linear sort of thing, and it's sort of known for 2 things. There's 2 things that sort of come out of Maury Island. And Maury Island, the incident happened near Seattle, right at the dawn of the UFO age in the summer of 1947. So it's right there at the beginning.
A few days before Kenneth Arnold and a few months before Roswell. Yeah.
Right.
Or a month before Roswell.
About a month. Yeah, it was in June of 47, and then Roswell was in July. And so basically, there were a couple of guys in a harbor boat in Seattle, in the harbor there near Maury Island, and they see a flying saucer, a flying round thing with portholes in it. A number of them, they're flying over the harbor. One of them seems to be struggling. It's sort of wibbling and wobbling, and it ejects some kind of slag or substance from it. And the other discs sort of surround it and sort of stabilize it, and then they all fly away. And the debris from the struggling saucer, I think, kills their dog on the boat and damages the boat.
That always broke my heart every time I hear the story. That's the fact that the dog died just
take some heart in the fact that it probably never happened. So you can sort of comfort yourself with that. But what's interesting about this is there's 2 guys. There's Harold Dahl and his supervisor, Fred Chrisman. And what's interesting is that this gets investigated by Kenneth Arnold, the guy who saw the inaugural flying saucer of the flying saucer era, and he's there, and he's working with Ray Palmer, who would go on to publish books and 17,000 magazines about UFOs and paranormal subjects, and who was behind the whole Richard Shaver Hollow Earth stuff. And they sort of look into this, and Over time, the story tends to change. It falls apart. Harold Dahl sort of clams up and says, I don't want to talk to anybody about it anymore. Fred Chrisman sort of becomes the voice of this and does all of Dahl's talking for him. It's a weird story. The Air Force gets involved. They send a couple officers to investigate. They take a sample of the junk that supposedly came out of the saucer. And then this sample and the 2 Air Force officers are killed in a plane crash flying back to their base from investigating this. There's some mysterious figures who supposedly tell Dahl to shut up and stop talking about it. So Gray Barker brings that in his book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, which sort of introduced the idea of the Men in Black. So the Men in Black sort of get retconned into this whole thing as well. It's this big, huge sort of thing that ends up, at the end of this, do we really know anything? No, we really don't. We know it was the source of a number of stories, like the Men in Black story, like the idea of the government having wreckage of a flying saucer, that they're keeping secret. And then Fred Chrisman ends up sort of connected, like I said, to the JFK assassination as supposedly being one of the tramps, at the grassy knoll that get arrested. And he had written into Amazing Stories magazine saying he fought the underground people, the Deros, on an island in the Pacific during World War II. It's just trying to say everything that comes out of it makes me surprised I actually did an episode about this because it's so confusing. But it's just nuts, and it doesn't get a lot of attention. It gets more than it used to, but it doesn't because it's just right there, like you said, with Roswell. It's with the guy who first saw the flying saucers.
Kenneth Arnold.
Yeah.
I forgot the book Kenneth Arnold wrote, which I actually have on audio. I listened to it on audio, is great. That story, it's Kenneth Arnold writing it, and I think a lot of editing was done by Ray Palmer.
Yeah.
But it's a great story, and you can just the vibe of Kenneth Arnold being kind of paranoid and mystified all at the same time. There's all kinds of little things where he went to he needed a room and he went to the only hotel in town that had a room.
Yes.
And they said, the room's waiting for you, Mr. Arnold, which is straight out of John Keel years later. Because Keel first arrived at, I think that's right. Do I have that right? When Keel arrived, I might be blending that with the Mothman Prophecies movie. When Keel arrived in
Point Pleasant,
the town, Point Pleasant, yes, they had a room for him. So,
Yeah.
Well,
I might be. You know what? Actually, now that I'm saying this is coming out of my mouth. That's from the Mothman Prophecies movie.
Well, in the book, if I'm not mistaken, the Mothman Prophecies starts with him knocking on someone's door and them threatening him, saying he's already been there 2 times earlier and he had never been there.
Yes, and then they said there was a man in black in town, and he realized that they were describing him because he had black hair and he was wearing a dark suit the day that he knocked on the door.
And there were other cases where people were seeing him when he wasn't there.
Yes, his doppelganger.
Yeah.
Oh, and then recently, this is going back maybe a decade ago, James Carrion, the former head of MUFON, who was preceded over MUFON when they went through some really dark times where there was a lot of state directors quit, and that was when they were involved with Bigelow. Yep. He was the one that sort of brought Bigelow into MUFON, and it was just a couple of years, and then Bigelow kind of opted out, or I'm not sure. It was kind of a dark falling out. But James Carrion had a career in military intelligence, which is kind of a theme for people who make it to the top of UFO organizations. But he has since gone. He had a blog for a while. I suspect it's still out there. And I remember reading it at the time, and it was a pretty dense article or set of articles where he went point by point through the Maury Island event and said this is a classic disinformation operation run by the government.
So,
but why would they run it within a month of the same summer as Roswell and everything like that. It's a very strange story all around.
What's your final conclusion, Aaron? What are the facts?
I think that Chrisman was trying to run some sort of scam.
Okay.
I don't know why, but has a long history of, some weird, shady behavior. There's a little bit of suspicion raised in the FBI file about Palmer attempting to sensationalize things, and there's I used it in the episode. There's a really interesting letter in the FBI file from Palmer to Arnold, because after the Air Force plane crashed, Arnold was like, "I'm out. I do not want to be involved with this anymore. This is not good." And Palmer sends him a letter and says, Chrisman is willing to contribute his share. I hope you will too. This thing must not be hushed up and forgotten. It's much too important to the people of America, if not the world, and no censorship of the matter is legal. You needn't fear that angle. You did a bang-up job of investigation. Also, you wrote one of the best articles about your June 24th experience I've ever read. You owe it to those two men who were killed. So you got Palmer sort of laying this guilt trip on Arnold to sort of keep the investigation going when Arnold really didn't want to. You had an Associated Press reporter named Ernie Vogel who gave his opinion to the FBI that Mr. Arnold, quote, Mr. Arnold stated that he thinks Palmer's business is a blind for something else, and that Dahl and Chrisman will do anything that Palmer asks him to, and will not talk unless Palmer tells him to. So you've got, this. It's weird. It's really strange. There's a lot of suspicion of everybody sort of being up to something. I think my sort of conclusion is there wasn't necessarily 5 things in the sky, but there was something going on, but I don't know what. But there's a lot of chicanery involved. It's one of those things where the real story is might be more interesting than flying saucers. Maybe.
And Kenneth Arnold, when he was initially flying over the Mount Rainier in 1947, he was looking for a crashed military aircraft. It was an aircraft full of Marines. And I think this was before the Air Force had actually formed, if I'm not mistaken. So he then had another aircraft crash, and his family said he was very, very distressed about the series of aircraft or air crashes that kind of marked that chapter of his life.
Mm-hmm.
Where people died, and he was very, he cared about these folks, so there's that aspect, that sort of synchronistic aspect, really bugged him. And I sort of argued in my second book that Kenneth Arnold certainly has all the hallmarks of an abductee. And I'm sure I talked about this in the other show. Yes. But one of the things was he was obsessed with synchronicities, especially number series and number synchronicities, which is, if you ever go to a UFO conference, like the people who have had the contact experiences, you ask them, like, what's your number? And they'll go, oh, my number is 444. And then you go to the next, like, oh, what's your number? My number is 1010. Like, all these people have these, like, synchronistic numbers that they're obsessed about. And I feel like I'm the same thing. And that was something that his daughter said, Kim Arnold said that about her father, that he was very fascinated with number synchronicities. And then also he was very troubled by the synchronicity, as I said before, of the 2 military air crashes that sort of defined that chapter of his life. Yeah.
One thing about and that certainly sort of ties in with his reluctance to keep investigating Maury Island after the Air Force crash. I think that ties in really well. One sort of thing about Maury Island is that the FBI part of the investigation ends when Dahl and Crispin talk to the FBI and say it never happened and that they made it all up. So, there's not much room to go on after that. Once the people who said they saw it say, well, really, we didn't see it. Where do you go? The FBI says, well, I think that's solved. Project Sign, which sort of covered this in their report in the early 50s. Sort of, you said this was a hoax. Was it a hoax? I'm not sure what the purpose of the hoax would have been. But yeah, it's just such a strange story. And another thing I like about it is it's sort of, being where it is sort of in time at the beginning of the whole UFO thing. There's no automatic assumption while it's going on that this is an alien spacecraft. That sort of gets, imposed on it later. But at the time, it was like, we don't know what this is. Is this a military thing? Is this a Soviet thing? Is this, some sort of weird invention that we haven't been told about? So, that's, another one of those sort of weird sort of in between points in UFO history.
Interesting. Now, Mike, one of the things you brought up, and I want to address this as like a general thing. You mentioned that Dr. Leo Sprinkle started using hypnosis before Bud Hopkins did. But how early? Who was like the first one to try and do this? And I mean, I want to throw in this disclaimer that hypnosis does not recover lost memories. This has been pretty set and proven at this point. It doesn't mean that it's not entering someone into an altered state of consciousness, however, where we may get different type of information. But who was the first one to come up with that idea that, hey, there's missing time, maybe we should hypnotize them?
I actually don't have a good answer to that, but I know that Dr. Benjamin Simon did it in the book about Betty and Barney Hill, The Interrupted Journey. He used hypnosis, and that would have been in the mid-'60s, early to mid-'60s. And then, and I know that Leo Sprinkle was using it in the 60s. I don't actually know when he was using it, but he was using it he was a psychologist, I think. He wasn't a medical doctor, but he was a psychologist, and at the time at the University of Wyoming in Laramie, and he was took it upon himself to do UFO research after having had several UFO sightings in his youth. But he was the one that was initially, and that I guess this ties back into the footage of him doing it in the 70s, which was well before Bud was using it. Bud didn't start using it until the 80s. So as far as a tool, hypnosis, was there in, I guess beginning in the early 60s. So it was, and Leo was one of the pioneers of using hypnotherapy and I would say that, boy, I've talked to a lot of hypnotherapists, and they truly believe that this is a way to get answers. So it's a very messy thing and I've gone through hypnosis myself, and some very strange stuff has come up, and I'm very cautious to believe it. And I'm also very contaminated, where I've read a lot of UFO books. So I certainly could be. My file cabinets are full of stuff. If I wanted to make something up, I've got all the ammunition I could ever want stored away in my brain. And
the problem with any of the alien abduction stuff using hypnosis is there's no way to verify it. So
there is no way to verify it. What there is, if you're the hypnotherapist, they keep a lot of information to themselves. Like, what is the just like a couple of things that I do know, and I won't give away, but like things on board the craft, like what do they actually look like, and then the order that things take place is, and researchers have come to terms that they feel like they're getting confirmation from the subjects that are under hypnosis. They're confirming each other. They don't know each other, but they're telling the same thing. Now, if you want, if we're dealing with the unknown, could it be that the hypnotic trance, let's say, is allowing the patient to like open up their own ESP and then read the mind of the hypnotherapist and tell them what they already know or what they want to hear. And that's equally as interesting as or even more interesting in many ways than what hypnosis might actually be recovering, if that makes sense.
There was an interesting story Brent Rains talked about that Keel reported on, where someone was hypnotized to remember their experiences. And when they were in the hypnotic trance, they said, there's a UFO outside right now. And the person got up in trance off the couch, went outside, and indeed there was a UFO over the building, which then I think just shot off or disappeared or whatever. But the hypnotherapist saw that as well, which, I mean, to me, that suggests that altered state is part of what's actually happening during the abduction experience.
Well, that's what people report, is that being on board. So if the Oz factor, there's like this kind of distorted sense of reality that comes with that. I've talked with people who have gone through hypnotherapy, and they say, that distorted sense of reality comes right back when you're in the, under the hypnotic trance, let's say. And so it makes it very difficult to trust these memories because they can feel so dreamlike. So yes, it's a mess to try to untangle all that. And I've also heard many stories of, the hypnotherapist trying to hypnotize the person, and the person's like, I can't go there. It's like, go deeper. And then bam, like poltergeist activity in the therapist's office.
Yes.
Like people pounding on the walls from the other side of the room when the hypnotherapist is pressing to get someone past a block. And it terrifies the hypnotherapist. So those kinds of things are in the lore and in the literature. Hypnosis might be something much more bizarre than we actually know.
Yeah, well, we don't know what it is. I mean, we know it's an altered state, but we don't understand it.
And it has therapeutic benefits for something.
Oh, definitely.
And it has like crime fighting. Like people do actually like remember the license plates of the getaway car or something like that under hypnosis.
Usually not, though. That's the thing. That they need some way of verifying it. And when they try to verify it, a lot of times it turns out they're wrong.
Okay, well, I'm just...
It's actually not admissible in court if something is recovered under hypnosis for that reason.
Which makes sense. And then, once again, and I could see, and I know, I mean, Leo Sprinkle tried to hypnotize me, and I couldn't go under. And I've tried it a handful of times, when there's
some people can't be hypnotized.
Well, I certainly can, because I had a wonderfully therapeutic session where I went in under hypnosis to try to alleviate the symptoms of clinical depression, and I had a great success with that. Yeah. So for therapeutic things, I think there's, and then that was to retrieve a past life. I'm getting way off the topic.
Well, we talked about this last time you were on.
Yeah. So
and it definitely has therapeutic things that can help people stop smoking. It's for behavioral changes. It definitely is effective. And of course, you got the sort of parlor trick hypnosis where they can have somebody do something and not remember they did it. Quack like a chicken or whatever. But it shows us how little we understand.
Bobby Kennedy. Yeah.
It shows us how little we know about the way our mind even works and how much control we actually have.
I agree. There is no definition for what is actually happening under hypnosis. So we're using something utterly mysterious as a tool to investigate something that's utterly mysterious. And I can only imagine that, you mix those two together, who knows where you're going to end up. I mean, we do know where we're going to end up. There's
the truth.
Well,
find the truth.
Yeah. Truth in quotes. Yeah.
Yes. I feel like with this stuff, there is no absolute truth. I think there's no absolute truth anyway. Everything comes down to perspective and things like that. But I feel like this phenomena just leads us forward. And maybe Valet is right that it's kind of a control factor, but maybe it's a positive control factor trying to push us in a forward direction.
Well, I think that's sort of the thing that comes across in a lot of the contactee literature over the years is that we are, all of them. I'm working on an episode about Dana Howard, who met Diane from Venus, and the message that comes through it a lot is that what the space brothers and sisters are doing is preparing us for the next level. And maybe it's sort of like in line with what you were saying, maybe something is preparing us and moving us forward, but not in such a we are here in our ships to move you forward sort of way, but more subtly, as the phenomenon as a whole. One thing about Sprinkle I always find interesting is he shows up I did an episode in the Weekly World News, and back in the early 80s when it was still sort of taking stories, basically people like Bill English from APRO would sell them stories for like $150. And so you had like the Cash Landrum story first hits in the Weekly World News. But there was a story about a woman who saw a cattle being a cattle, good grief, a cow being sort of dissected and drained of blood while she was on a spaceship, and Leo Sprinkle hypnotized her, and his picture's there in the story. And this is the same thing that's used if you've seen Linda Moulton Howe's Strange Harvest.
Strange Harvest,
Strange Harvest. Yeah, so it's that same scene where Sprinkle is in it hypnotizing the woman. And I'm wondering if that's, apart from the Betty and Barney Hill TV movie, if sort of Sprinkle was the first UFO hypnotist person to sort of penetrate the mainstream.
Yeah.
Such as it is.
And he very, yes. Yeah. And I will say, so Whitley or Leo Sprinkle he's still alive. He's in his 90s now. He's still doing work he runs a counseling center in Laramie, Wyoming. And I tell you, this guy walks down the hall at that counseling center, and everyone there who works there watches him walk by like they are watching a saint walk by. This guy is a radiant, beautiful, huge-hearted man. And I'm not saying anything that everyone else would say. He's a really remarkable person. So in this field, you get these characters, and I'm sort of smitten by the as you said, like, it's going to be tough to find the truth, right? So if you're gonna go down this path, it's wonderful that there are people like Leo that are so big-hearted and radiant, that are part of this strange little circus.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say anything bad about him.
No,
it would be impossible. I watched him lose his temper one time at someone in a support group meeting, and he did it beautifully. He was like doing it for effect. Like, this person was struggling and was not like dealing with their issues, and he didn't lose his temper, but he spoke very straight and firmly. So
nice. So, Aaron, since you've been delving for a few years now into the contactee culture, what do you make overall of all that? Because I know a lot of people just dismiss it as these people were frauds, the hoaxsters and such. But having delved in as deeply as you have, what impression do you come away with?
I think there are some who were absolute fraudsters and hoaxsters. Probably the best example is a guy named Reinhold Schmidt. Did an episode about him a while back, and he had this contact experience, and he, they were all sort of, they all had German accents, and they spoke German, but he knew German because he was from an old German family in Nebraska, and so he understood it. And it turns out he had multiple arrests and a conviction for various fraud related things over the years, and he claimed that the aliens were taking him in their ships and showing him where he could mine minerals that could cure sick children of cancer and other diseases, and he was convicted of bilking old ladies out of about $25,000 based on his UFO stories about where these minerals were. He was a fraud. Then you've got people like Orfeo Angelucci, whose stories are bizarre and strange and full of really interesting details, like the beverage he drinks that is basically a hallucinogen of like a like Aldous Huxley style Brave New World mind expanding, or not Brave New World, Gates of Perception, style mind expanding substance, and who, you can't sort of point to a place where he was making loads of money off his UFO stories, right? He's just a sort of genuine guy with some really strange experiences. Were his experiences extraterrestrials? I don't know. I kind of doubt it. Did he have an actual experience that in some way his mind interpreted in this way? It seems kind of likely. Was he a test subject for a government mind control experiment with some kind of hallucinogen? I think Nick Redfern sort of posits that with Angelucci's story. Maybe, maybe not. But then you've got people in the middle. People like George Van Tassel and people like Howard Menger, who, their stories don't always, make a lot of sense in a literal way, but there's some strangeness there. So I think there's a spectrum of frauds and hoaxsters to people who've had genuine experiences. Now, just like with abductions and hypnosis, what those experiences actually are is going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to try to, determine. We'll probably never know what these people actually experienced. Much like I've been saying since I started looking at this, I think one of the most significant things about the contactees is that they were using the UFO and flying saucer sort of culture and genre to promote and spread and propagate various, religious, theosophical, or political or social ideas at the time, and generally around notions of peace and nuclear annihilation being on the whole negative thing, right? Yeah. But I think there are some who probably had real experiences of some kind.
Okay, all right.
But what those were, who knows?
Interesting. And how many episodes have you done?
Oh gosh, 80 some, wow. I think. Yeah, I stopped numbering them. Because it just seems sort of like, I think after a while it gets sort of intimidating to newcomers. It's like just a title. Here's a story about this. I think is maybe a more accessible way.
All right, so let's look at what else we have in the same time period. You mentioned Quatermass in the Pit, Mike, and that was a fantastic movie. And I don't.
Yes, it was a fantastic.
I guess movie, it's Quatermass. I always call it Quatermass, but it's Quatermass in the Pit.
Yeah, Quatermass. Yeah.
Yes, it was based on a Nigel Neal television series, and then I think he was a science fiction author. From Britain, and it was from 1967. And in a way, it's like a parallel to 2001. Both of them have the sort of ancient, astronauts coming to Earth, in pre-human history, yeah. And the story revolves around they're changing they're doing a dig and putting a new tunnel in for the London Underground, and they come upon what amounts to like a buried flying saucer. And the script is so wise. Some of the special effects are a little on the cheesy side, but it's a Hammer film, so it's the same film company that did all the Dracula and Frankenstein movies, the British movies with what's his name? The British actor. He's in every Hammer film. Yes.
Yeah. Christopher Lee.
Christopher Lee, exactly. Yeah. Christopher Lee is not in this movie, but and it's wonderful. It's wonderful, and it plants the seeds of the ancient astronaut stuff before. I'm not sure if Eric von Daniken, his book didn't come out until 68 or 9.
Right.
I think it was 68. So it would have, but he must have had been putting newspaper articles out and such there. But as far as a piece of science fiction, it is wonderful, and then I would argue also that 2001 begins with a piece of alien technology, let's say, arriving on Earth in the form of the monolith, and then they dig it up, just like in the London Underground, but they do it on the moon in the 2001. So,
Right.
so there's this archaeological kind of digging, and they even look strangely the same. The digs between 2001 and Quatermass in the Pit, the way that, I mean, they actually, I mean, like, they're both were shot in England, so they're, I don't know. They look enough the same that I find it interesting. And then I would also argue that 2001 would be, or could be considered an abduction movie where Dave Bowman, I mean, he's taken through the wormhole.
True.
And goes to another realm. And ends up in this weirdly lit white room. I mean, that's abduction stuff. And then it just jumps ahead into the late 80s, early 90s with the hybrid half human, half alien fetus, the Star Child, which is interwoven into modern abduction literature. It's all over the place that men and women have somehow been used to breed this hybrid child that is the next evolutionary stage of mankind, if you follow the logic of all the literature.
Right.
And those two movies just parallel each other in such beautiful ways.
Yeah, I've never seen the Hammer movie of Quatermass in the Pit. I've seen I think I've seen the surviving episode. I'm not sure if I can't remember which episodes survive of the 1950s British one.
Yeah.
And
it's almost the same story. Yeah, it's exactly the same story.
And that was 58. And it was the third of the Quatermass things, because they did Quatermass Experiment and then Quatermass 2 and then Quatermass in the Pit. And there
is a fourth Quatermass that came out
from the 70s. Yeah.
Great.
That one is really sort of Quatermass is an old man and sort of dealing with the hippies. So it's good stuff. And Quatermass was a huge influence on Doctor Who. There's a lot of Quatermass overtones especially in 70s Doctor Who, because 70s Doctor Who sort of overlapped the Ancient Alien stuff. So you've got some elements there as well, and Atlantis and stuff like that. Yeah, Quatermass is just huge. And what's funny is Nigel Neal thought Doctor Who was just low quality trash and was far too classy because they were like, we could get Nigel Neal to write for Doctor Who, and he was like, no. The Quatermass stuff is great, and I need to watch the Hammer film. I'm more of what was the sort of competitor to Hammer, the sort of other British horror company. I can't remember this. I
couldn't remember Christopher Lee, so
can't remember. Amicus Films. Yeah, they've got some fun stuff too. But yeah, that British horror, it's just great stuff. And in Quatermass in the Pit, the thing is like sort of the idea that this alien artifact is sort of the source of evil on Earth, and that sort of like violence is sort of like almost an original sin sort of thing, sort of a mythological sort of thing that goes into it. So it's fun stuff.
I don't want to give away too much, but the ending of both Quatermass in the Pit and 2001: A Space Odyssey, it gets really psychedelic.
Yeah.
I mean,
So I actually went through and found everything Quatermass I could find at one point, because I had seen the movie and then realized, wait, there's other stuff. So there's the TV show was actually the Quatermass Experiment, and that was in 1955. Or no, I'm sorry, the 1955 film was the Quatermass Experiment,
which I've seen, and that's wonderful. Yeah,
and
that is a great quality movie. It's wonderful. And
then there's Quatermass in the Pit. Quatermass 2. Quatermass in the Pit is 1967. Quatermass
in 2001 came out in 1968.
And there was also a remake that came out in 2005 called the Quatermass Experiment. And if I remember right, that wasn't very good.
I liked it.
I may be wrong. I don't clearly remember it.
it was neat because just like the original TV productions, the 50s Quatermass 1, 2, and Pit in the 50s that the BBC did, they broadcast it live. So
that's right.
It was, yeah. So it had Mark Gatiss and David Tennant right before he became Doctor Who, or sorry, the Doctor in Doctor Who. He had a role in it, and it was live, and it wasn't. I mean, it wasn't as good as the original, but I just love the idea of, let's do this live, and it's sort of a tangent, but people these days have no idea how TV used to be. There's no expectation of anybody ever seeing a broadcast ever again if they weren't watching it at the time.
Right.
My favorite sort of example of this is like the BBC production of 1984 from the early 50s that I think Rudolph Cartier directed. They did it live, and then they wanted to broadcast it again, so they had to do it live again for the rerun, which is just completely mind-blowing.
It's a theater mindset,
it's theater, and British TV sort of comes out of a theater tradition, and American TV sort of comes out of a Hollywood film tradition. So if you want to look at the differences between American and British TV, it's like those two sort of mindsets are sort of right there. Yeah.
So we're running out of time, but what is there anything else in this time period that we haven't touched on that's important? I mean, I'm sure there's a ton.
Yeah, I was thinking when we were talking about topics. It's I was thinking like, well, Project Sign and Project Grudge. But I was like, we did Project Blue Book, and I'm pretty sure we talked about
the others as well. Yes.
Yeah. So we talked about various contactees, and I can't believe I'm the one saying this, but you've seen one contactee and you've seen like 80% of the contactees. But yeah, I think we've.
I don't think who I don't think we talked about is the guy you mentioned earlier, whose name I can never get right, Antonio Villas-Boas.
Oh, Villas-Boas.
Villas-Boas.
Yeah.
Okay.
Argentina. I think. Yeah, Argentina. I think. Venezuela. Man, it's late. It's late for me. This is an early morning.
Want me to run with this one?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay. If I forget anything, you just jump right in. You're not going to hurt my feelings. So he was on his tractor at night because it was hot during the day. Do I have this right?
Yeah.
Yep. And then he a craft lands. I think it was egg shaped. And they grab him and basically drag him in. So it's a true abduction. I don't think he wanted to go in. And he is put in a room, and they do a sort of medical exam on him. And then he's left alone in the room, and the door opens up, and there's this beautiful naked woman. But she is obviously not human. She looks very, her eyes are slightly larger, and her chin is a little more pointy. And then I think there's like a smoke or a scent that comes in the room, and then she basically initiates, sex, and they go through the act, and he's very blunt the way he says it. They didn't, and they finish, and then she pets her tummy, and then points up, like to the stars, basically implying like, I'm pregnant, I'm going away up to the stars. And he realized that he said something like, I felt like I was being used as the stud horse in the farm.
Yeah.
And that case, and that fellow went on to be a lawyer, and he's died. I can't remember when he died, but he was
early 90s, I think.
Yeah. So he went on to be a totally respected man in the community, had this very, very strange story. And if I remember, the UFO research community did not want to touch this.
Really?
No, because it was like 1957, and it was I think the story first appears in APRO's newsletter, because APRO had a guy, Martin. Jose Martin, something like that, who sort of was a journalist, and he got the story, and then he talked to a doctor in Brazil who was connected to APRO. So APRO gets the story and sort of runs with it. And I think most people probably encountered it sort of in the early 60s in Jim and Coral Lawrence's book of various humanoid encounters. So it's in the APRO newsletter, but then it's in this book as well. And I'm the only thing I'd add to what Mike said about the account is that the creature, the female creature, didn't talk, but she sort of yelped and howled and barked and sort of made animal noises. That's something that always sort of stuck with me about that. And you're right, he was sort of forcibly taken into the craft. It was a literal abduction, from what I remember.
And Mac Tonys writes about this in his book, The Cryptoterrestrials.
And it was Brazil.
You're the one who said Argentina earlier.
I know. I said Argentina, and I also thought Venezuela. So I thought almost every country but the right one. Was it Ecuador?
But this is, this was not retrieved under hypnosis now, was it?
No. And this was just his story, and he was remarkably consistent in sticking to it. He didn't change it or recant it or anything like that.
And it seems like it's not the type of story someone would have made up.
No. I mean that story reappears over and over and over again in the literature, in the abduction literature,
which is interesting.
Not the yelping, barking dog part. I don't remember that showing up anywhere else, but certainly. There's a book from I think it was the early 2000s called Hair of the Alien, which had a very similar case in Australia.
Yeah, and it's got the reproductive overtones and of later abduction lore. So that's interesting. He had some marks on his skin. I don't think. I mean, if I was being wacky, I might say they were like implant marks. But he had some sort of sores on his skin. I think if somebody said, "What do you think they were?" to me, I'd say, I don't know, radiation. Radiation can cause skin irritation and lesions of various kinds, so that might be a possibility. But yeah, it's a strange story, and it's the woman and the other beings are humanoid and human-ish, so it's got that sort of contacty sort of space brother, space sister overtone, but it's the forcible contact with the sexual and reproductive overtones that we tend to think of more as a later thing. So it's a really interesting. It's one of the most interesting cases.
Yeah,
and it's interesting. I like that you mentioned that he did become a lawyer. He was sort of a student at the time, I think. And what's interesting about that is that one of the reasons that initially more serious researchers rejected this is he's just an illiterate peasant. It's like, well, no, he was a smart guy working on a farm, and of course I sort of reject the whole, they were rural people, they didn't know what was going on, they weren't sophisticated or educated.
Right.
Well, how educated do you have to be to know whether or not you were dragged on board a weird egg? It's like, well, where do you go to school? Yeah, it's so yeah, it's and so that sort of thing sort of plays up a little bit of the classism that can emerge in some of these fields as well.
Yeah,
and what we consider to be a credible story usually depends on the sort of the inbuilt biases that we have about who's credible and who's not.
Yeah, and that remains today. I mean, there's people, in the UFO, you go to a UFO conference. I mean, it's when you get a credible person telling an incredible story, that counts for a lot. And then, and that seems to be, in my sense, the majority of the people who have these experiences would appear very credible. But then someone has a drinking problem or like real life issues sort of invade or crime issues or something like that.
Right.
You know, there's been to jail or something like that. It changes everything, and so people are, very knee jerk in the way they treat this stuff.
Absolutely.
On the other hand, though, you have someone like Whitley Strieber, who is eloquent, educated, but was dismissed because of that very reason.
Yeah, it's a little too polished, isn't it? Yeah.
That was his crime in a way, was being a good writer, or being a great writer in essence. The problem with communion is it's too good.
And being a novelist. I mean, to be honest, this is a writer of fiction. Is he branching out into fiction presented as fact?
Yeah.
So you've got that going in there as well.
So you got to kind of fall in between. You can't be too smart or too good at this stuff, but at the same time, you can't be too lower class.
And you can't be too eager to tell your story.
Yeah. I think nowadays people are a little more comfortable talking about this, and whereas
oh my gosh, yes.
And oddly enough, I think that comes down to these reality TV shows, and it comes down to even the To the Stars stuff, trying to make it a little more mainstream, whatever their real goal is, but it's put it in the public eye a little bit more overall, and so I think people are more comfortable talking about it, more comfortable sharing their stories. So even though, you can hold this stuff up to scrutiny, there is some good coming out of it.
Oh, yeah. And I think the internet plays a big role in this, too.
Oh, yeah.
Just the availability of this kind of information is just one click away, and just the number of YouTube videos. So in present day, what's remarkable to me is there's a lot of videos online where people just sit in front of their computer, tell their story, and put it up on YouTube.
Yeah.
And there's no editing. And then there's...
the oversharing generation.
Yeah, the reporting, the number of files reported at MUFON is going down. So you would say, oh well, people aren't these cases, the UFO sightings and such, and contact cases, those are going down. But nobody goes to UFO. They put it on YouTube. They put it on their blog.
Yeah, the kids these days are not calling up the
1-800 number,
the 1-800 numbers and the boomers of UFON, Which, I think there's some interesting sort of sociological angles to generational change in these fields as well. What's the best venue for reaching the most people? Is it a large international organization with organized chapters that have monthly meetings at the conference room at the local motel, as Michigan MUFON used to? I don't know if how recently they've done that, but they used to meet at the restaurant at the motel, up the road from me, in suburban Flint, and they would have a speaker and they would have a business meeting. And who under the age of 50 is going to put up with that nonsense? I wouldn't, and 15 minutes away from me. I'm not going to that. I'm not going to another meeting of my own free will. It's like, got enough of that at work.
Do you know, you're from Michigan? Do you know Bill Konkoleski?
I know of him.
He has the mother of all hypnosis stories.
We always end up at opposite libraries giving talks. He gets some of the suburbs. I got some of the other suburbs last year. It was last year in I think nationwide there was a sort of library sort of space theme for summer programs. So I had a bunch of library talks about flying saucers last year, which was great. I think I did like a dozen of them, and he did like another dozen in different libraries. So,
if you ever meet him, ask him his hypnosis story.
I will say Mike Clelland tells me that I need you to tell me your hypnosis story,
and he'll tell you. Yeah,
cool.
You're just gonna.
And he's a wonderful guy. As someone from Michigan is.
You're not gonna tell us what the story is, Mike. You're just gonna leave everyone out.
Oh my gosh, hanging. I got to paraphrase it from memory. Okay, so he goes husband and wife. They're the MUFON state directors, the former MUFON state directors at the time of Michigan, and he's had these contact experiences. He's a young man at the time. He had all kinds of experiences as a teenager, and he's a wonderful storyteller. So I'm going to do this. I'm not going to do it justice. He goes to the hypnosis session, and it's at a woman's home, And so the woman's husband is in the next room, and the woman goes through the hypnotic induction. All of a sudden, he's motionless. She can't get anything out of him. He's like not answering, and he says like I was really tense and stuff like that, and I had all these problems in my life, and I was like he would had all these ways to lock his room, basically. Like all these things he would do. He'd literally put like newspaper down. So if like aliens came in the room, he'd hear the newspaper crinkling around his bed. And so he lays down, and then he goes into this timeless realm. He's like, all of a sudden, like I was in the netherworld. It was like this timeless realm, just in awe of this. And at the same time, the guy in the other room is on the couch. He looks over, and there's 3 gray aliens at the other end of the room. And he's paralyzed in the couch. The husband. There's 3 aliens in the room. He's paralyzed. And then the woman who has no knowledge of this, who's doing the hypnosis, the wife, and poor Bill, or on the going through this like, Bill, can you come back? Where are you? Like, you're not responding. Goes on and on. Finally, he comes back, and he said it was just like, he said all of a sudden, like I was in this magical ethereal realm, and then I just came into my body, and I felt like I weighed 10,000 pounds. Like I'm physical again. Ugh. and then the little aliens in the other room leave, and the guy can move around again on the couch. And so Bill goes, like he says, he'd been laying there a long time. So I need to use the bathroom. So he goes into the bathroom, and he hears the husband and wife tell this story. Like, honey, there were like gray aliens in the room, and I couldn't move. And it was like, Bill was like totally out. Like he was totally, so he tells the story much more wonderfully than I do. But that night he goes home, and he said, I'm not going to lock the doors like I usually do. I'm not going to put the newspaper down on the floor. And he said he slept well for the first night in a decade.
That's really interesting.
I might be making some mistakes.
Right,
in this
that's fine.
I'm pretty close, I feel.
I think that just sort of bolsters my claim that hypnosis is weird.
Yes.
And that was what I was biting my tongue trying to, like, do I tell the Bill Konkolesky story? Like, it's sort of his story. It's kind of up to him to tell
right,
it. So.
but it fits in here nicely because we were talking about hypnosis and like I said, that Keel story where the guy walked out and there was a UFO, while he was still under hypnosis.
Yeah.
So, who knows? All right, so we're pretty much out of time, but So, Aaron, you do some sort of podcast now?
Yeah, apparently. It's at saucerlife.com or anywhere you find podcasts, and it usually drops on every other Wednesday. And on off Wednesdays, I've been doing like a little 10-minute thing just because I always have weird stuff left over. So it ends up being most Wednesdays now, even though with all my classes being all online, I have even less time during lockdowns somehow. Also, I'm going to be a speaker the first weekend of May at PhenomenaCon, which is an online paranormal conference that's been put together, and you can find it at phenomenacon.com. And there's other speakers that listeners of the show may be familiar with, Josh Cutchin, Timothy Renner, Alan Greenfield, and some others. So a lot of the Hellier people are they're sort of behind it. So it's like 3 evenings, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, first weekend in May, of talks. So.
Interesting.
For $15. So, and you don't need to pay for travel or a hotel. I think all conferences should be online so I can stay home.
But I think part of the reason people like going to conferences is they like actually meeting people.
I don't. Quarantine is wonderful. I'm really enjoying myself.
I love meeting people.
I generally like meeting people. I mean, I'm one of those people who, there'll be a concert and I'll be like, yeah, I'm going to go to that concert until the day of the concert. Then I'm going, do I really want to go to this concert? I don't really need to go out. And now that there's nothing happening and I can't leave, I'm just craving to go somewhere.
I have declared to my wife, like, we are having so many people over for dinner once this is over. We are just like dinner parties every weekend, like everybody we can imagine.
Bill Konkoleski.
Yep. Well, my wife has veto power on invitations. So he's a UFO guy, honey. It'll be fine.
He's a nice guy from Michigan. Yes.
Mike Clelland says he has a good hypnosis story to share.
Someone on Facebook created an event that you could just put interested to and not go to, like most people do.
Perfect.
And Mike, you're now doing a podcast too. Well, sort of a podcast.
I've been doing it for about a year now.
Is it podcasted or is it just?
It is technically a podcast. It's funny. It's but it's not available. I've been bugging. So my boss is Whitley Strieber. So I'm doing it on Whitley Strieber's site, and he's a wonderful boss. He gives me complete free reign to do whatever I want, including skip a week or two if I need to. It's a 1-hour podcast. It's called The Unseen. And I did a podcast ages ago on my own blog, and ran for about 4 years or so. Right. And that was totally my own therapy. And I figured, like, I could go into this podcast, and what I realize I do is I immediately fall back, and I just feel like I'm on the therapist's couch half the time I'm doing the podcast. So, but it's been really well received. People have been liking it, and comes out once a week, and they're all archived on the Unknown Country site. And they're also put on YouTube too. And there are some commercials if you're a non-paying member. The commercials are very, very minimal, much, much more minimal than, let's say, Coast to Coast.
That's not hard.
I have, So, and I am, I've got 3 books out now. And I will very soon have 3 audiobooks out.
Nice.
I have 1 out, and the next one is soon to be out, and then the third one is in the process of getting created right now.
And your website?
My website is, so if you Google UFOs Owls, my name is the first thing that comes up. You can find me that way if you can't spell my name. And then if you go to hiddenexperience.blogspot.com, you'll find it there. Or if you type my name, Mike Clelland, there's a site that simply leads you to the other blog just by searching my name.
All right. Thank you both.
Yes, tons of fun.
Where Did the Road Go is made possible in part by help from our Patreons. And special thanks in particular to those Patreons pledging $10 or more: Allison Cook, Lindsay Trebet, Super Inframan, Tim, The Great Change, Stone Wilderness, Luke Osborne, Rob Drummond, Alex Whitcomb, Damian Tallman, Edu Camahort, Tactical Therapist, Janet Bunderson, 36 Dingo, Maria, the exceptionally talented Sam Sheeran, Jennifer Campbell, American Rambler, Kevin, John Rutledge Foster, Eric Citron, Andy McNamara, Matthias Sumby, Dominic O'Malley, Christopher Vaughn, Riker and Stark, Roland Belsat, Sean Cosgrove, Jose A., Roger Gonzalez, Craig Cisternos, Ray Benedetto, Linz Jackson K., Alfred Tuttle, Matthew Sproul, Kevin Schreck, Patricia Giaquinta, William Lovelace, Mark Brady, Chris 646, Carla Mahoney, and James Lattimore. Thank you all so very much. Okay, we may end up doing another one of these. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff we didn't talk about in this sort of retro UFO history show. Stuff we should have talked about the first time through, but we're kind of rushing a little to try and encompass everything. So maybe we'll do another one of these sometime soon. There is a Patreon extra segment I did with both Mike and Aaron that will be up later this week. And welcome to all the new patrons that have signed up this month. Thank you for your support. You can become a patron for only $3 a month if you go to wheretodtheroadgo.com and click on the Patreon link. As well, keep sending in those stories. If you have a weird story, weird experience, stories at wheretodtheroadgo.com is the place to send them. Also, if you like the show, go rate us on, iTunes and share us with your friends. Everything helps. I thank all of you for the support. See you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.